Hello. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to present our initiative here at the Open Theatre event of FENS. My name is Luísa, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the parietal team at NeuroSpin in Paris, active in the field of cognitive neuroscience and brain imaging. And on behalf of the Committee of the Women in Neuroscience Repository, I'm here to discuss the current scenario regarding gender balance in academia, namely in the context of research in neuroscience, and introduce you our project and its scope. So the problem of gender inequality is real, and it is reflected in several sectors of the society, including in professional domains. So we can define it as a disadvantage experienced by women in regard to accessibility of new opportunities in life. And although it is unquestionable that much has been done in the past century, social structures evolve at a slow pace, and thus women still facing overall more impediments than men, for instance, in the progress of their professional careers. And concretely in academia, there is ample evidence that gender bias is still present. For instance, the gender pay gap in many universities and research institutes is notorious. And we can take as an example the University College London, whose average difference is 17.5% and close to the national level one. Also, we observe a higher career switching rate as the seniority of the position increases, namely for female postdoctoral researchers who are planning to have or already have children. And thus, women generally encounter more obstacles that prevent them to follow in the long term the research career pathway that can be worsened by several other factors, such as lower acceptance rate of papers with the female last author, lower recognition of their contribution, namely in number of citations, lower acceptance rate for funding, lower rate of invitation to conferences or workshops, and lower chances of being hired for tenure-track positions at the same competence level. And of course, all these adverse circumstances are further sustained by underrepresentation of women in peer review processes of scientific articles and deciding bodies, as there is a natural tendency for homophily. So we have published last year an article in the European Journal of Neuroscience wherein we characterize in more detail this problem and provide some quantitative evidence specific to the research career in neuroscience. So here we show an histogram of gender proportion percentage covering several aspects of the academic life in neuroscience between the past 2 to 10 years. Each green and gray bar represents respectively the absolute frequency of a given proportion of women and men. Of course, these proportions are complementary between them, and this complementarity reflects the symmetry of the plots in relation to the 50%. So they depict the academic achievement by men and women given different 5 outcomes, highlighting the significant difference between them and consequently women's underrepresentation in all these academic domains. So here we show data of last year obtained from Bias Watch Neuro on gender composition of conferences in neuroscience. Actually, I must stress that the program of conferences are visible sources of information on bias, unlike, for example, nominated boards of deciding bodies that are not necessarily disclosed. But despite the efforts of the organizers, many conferences still remain below the base rate with respect to representation of women as invited speakers. And here we present a list of sources on bias and diversity containing data and also peer-reviewed research, online tests, as well as databases of women representatives and go-to resources. So what are the consequences of gender bias in research? So overall, lack of diversity in working groups leads to less innovation, flexibility, and reduced performance in strategic thinking. So one should note that research is a creative process that only benefits from collective intelligence, that can be boosted by social sensitivity, which has been in turn reported to be on average higher in women. Also, because people tend to study population groups to which they belong, underrepresentation of women, for example, as a target population in biomedical research, has some negative consequences, such as lower efficacy of medical techniques in both treatment and prevention. And also mixing either equal or unequal proportions of female and male groups may lead to bias in results. So therefore, studying these groups separately should be preferred. And finally, because we are living times wherein artificial intelligence is emerging and becoming an important technological tool, we shall stress that as humans have their own bias, so AI. Therefore, we must assure that gender bias will not influence the model's outcome of AI infrastructures, as this would limit or even jeopardize the use of such technology, for example, in real clinical settings. So in our paper, we describe possible solutions that have been proposed tackling gender bias at 3 different levels: institutional, organizational, and individual level. So for instance, one popular strategy at an institutional level is the implementation of gender quotas in order to counterbalance male predominance. And this can be achieved in several different ways. We take as an example the cascading model for hiring, where the quotas reflect the proportion of women candidates at the level below the open position. So we denote that quotas have been subject of a lot of debate and criticism, as they stand for regulations with a certain level of counter effects. Nevertheless, this type of positive discrimination to correct bias should be seen as temporary processes imposed to obtain the equilibrium after the transition period. So at the organizational level, and in order to break down the barrier of women attendance in conferences and other scientific public events, one important recommendation we can give is the setup of childcare support during such events, since the junior career stage frequently coincides with the period of early childcare. Secondly, organizers of public events can improve diversity of the candidates or participants by using several online facilities, as the databases and repositories listed before. And in line with this idea, individuals of underrepresented groups can also sign up and create their profile in these repositories. So this will not only improve their own visibility, but also the search diversity of the users. So inspired by this idea, we have then created the Women in Neuroscience repository that hosts the profile of women researchers active in the field of neuroscience. So the aim of this engine is to help you to identify and recommend women neuroscientists for conferences, symposia, or collaborations. So this project started in the beginning of 2018 with Jessica collecting women profiles through a Google form. And afterwards, together with Greg, she created a website already with 250 profiles. And a few months later, the website was then open to the public, and after some publicity, in particular during OHBM of 2018, a board was constituted. And since then, we have been working not only on improving the website and advertising it within the scientific community, but also on raising awareness about gender bias in neuroscience and how this problem can be progressively mitigated. So nowadays, the repository has more than 1,400 profiles of different levels of seniority. and from many different geographical areas. And if you identify yourself as a woman doing research in any field concerning neuroscience, you are free to create your own profile in a repository. So you can also search for profiles using different keywords and filters. We have already a filter for those based in underrepresented countries, but we are planning to integrate other filters in the future, targeting other population groups. And in order to improve our search engine and provide the users with the richer information of the profiles, we invite anyone who has attended the public scientific demonstration of a women researcher with a profile in a repository to write a recommendation. And here you can find an example on how you can do it. So I'd like to finalize with some take-home messages. If you identify yourself as a woman neuroscientist, you're welcome to create your profile. To all organizing committees, we invite you to use our repository to find profiles. And to everyone, submit the recommendation and please spread the word. So for instance, if you give a talk, you can add the WiNRepo promoting slide that you can download from the website. And at last, I'd like to announce that we are looking for volunteers. So if you want to join our cause, and you can fill this form, and you may want to check the code of the website, which is publicly available on GitHub. And thank you very much for your attention.